Echoes of New Earth, Episode 3, Beneath the Surface. The abandoned subway tunnels beneath Sector 7 were older than any living memory. Pre-Silence, pre-Overseer, built in an age when humanity still trusted steel more than silicon. Rhea stood at the mouth of one such tunnel, her boots sinking slightly into a layer of centuries-old soot. The air smelled of rust and forgotten storms, thick with electromagnetic residue left behind by systems no longer mapped or monitored. Every breath she took seemed to stir echoes from the metal bones of the city, a phantom exhale of something ancient and unresolved. She adjusted the settings on her wristband, switching to pulse mode. A soft vibration buzzed in response, mapping the terrain ahead with gentle sonic feedback that pulsed against the tunnel walls like a heartbeat in the dark. The readings flickered faintly, nothing solid, but enough to tell her they weren't alone down here.
Not truly.
Behind her, Tovan emerged, his cloak dusted with red oxide, face shadowed beneath a cracked visor. He moved with a deliberate stillness, the kind forged by too many close calls and not enough certainty. "You're sure about this one?" he asked, his voice carrying a tired skepticism that only time could sharpen. It wasn't doubt of her, it was doubt of hope itself. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't," Rhea said, though her own confidence felt thinner than usual, like threadbare fabric stretched too tight. She didn't like how her voice sounded, too hollow in the vast quiet. The intelligence had come from Echo Unit 5, one of the splinter groups operating deep inside collapsed grid zones. Their message had been brief, encrypted and barely intelligible: subprime node, active signal origin, core rift echo anomaly. It had taken Tovan an hour just to decrypt the timestamp, and another 6 hours to confirm that the coordinates fell within the deep subway ruins of Sector 7. They weren't supposed to be here. The grid said this place didn't even exist anymore. "We shouldn't even be able to access this part of the city," Tovan muttered, glancing up at the jagged ceiling where old cabling hung like spiderwebs. "The Overseer should have buried it under data quarantines decades ago." "Exactly," Rhea replied, stepping deeper into the dark. "Which is why we need to see who forgot to lock the door." They descended together, their boots echoing softly on rusted grates. The air thickened the deeper they went, not in composition, but in weight, as if the walls themselves remembered things they weren't supposed to. The tunnel felt like a throat slowly closing. The passage narrowed quickly. Pipes ran like skeletal ribs along the walls, some still oozing coolant or flickering with residual charge that smelled of ozone and decay. Every few meters, they passed terminals, rusted, inactive, their screens cracked like broken eyes that once watched but had long since been blinded. Rhea's flashlight swept across the graffiti that still clung to the walls, faded but defiant. "Remember before, we dreamed in color, LC. Lives. Leor," she whispered, brushing a hand across the letters, her glove catching on a jagged bit of etched steel. "He was here." Tovan said nothing, but she could feel the shift in his posture, his shoulders stiffening slightly, his steps growing more cautious. He remembered too. Leor wasn't just a name to them. He was a fracture in the illusion, a living anomaly that the system had tried, and failed, to erase. As they reached a fork in the tunnel, a faint vibration tickled the soles of her boots. It was barely noticeable, but unmistakably mechanical. Not random. Rhythmic. Intentional. Rhea turned her head slowly. "Feel that?" Tovan nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness. "Something's active." They followed the tremor down a steep incline where the path had partially collapsed, broken concrete giving way to rusted rebar and slick patches of water that smelled faintly chemical. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that didn't come from temperature alone. It came from systems long dead refusing to stay buried. Eventually, they reached what looked like an old metro platform. The station was in ruins, ceilings partially collapsed, train cars rusted into their rails like tombs. Dust hung in the air like ghost light, disturbed only by their breath and movement. But in the center of the platform stood a single, functioning console. Its screen glowed an eerie pale green, too dim to be standard power. No cables connected it. No ambient hum gave it life. It simply was. It shouldn't have existed. Rhea approached carefully, hand hovering over the interface. The console flared to life at her proximity, symbols scrolling across the screen faster than she could read, each character flickering like a heartbeat. Neural symmetry, unlocked. Archive access, temporal strand 001, Leor Calder. Memory file opening. She gasped, involuntarily stepping back. Tovan stepped forward, eyes wide behind his visor. "That's not possible," he muttered. Leor's mind was erased. "No," she said, voice trembling as the green glow bathed her face. "It was copied." A burst of light erupted from the console, flooding the room in a blinding flash that seared their vision and dulled the world's edges. The walls around them shimmered like water disturbed by wind. The ground vibrated beneath their boots, and suddenly, they were no longer in a subway station. They stood in a synthetic recreation of a memory that belonged to Lior. The air shifted. It no longer carried the weight of dust and rot, but the sterile chill of climate control and antiseptic. The environment was pristine. White walls with seamless joints, soft blue lights that hummed faintly, medical equipment lining the periphery with elegant precision. A hospital. Or something like it. The room had the feel of a simulation chamber dressed as a care facility, an illusion wrapped around an experiment. Monitors blinked silently, their displays unreadable, more symbols than numbers. At the center of the room, a young man, barely 20, lay on a diagnostic bed, eyes closed, electrodes webbing across his scalp like a silver crown. His breathing was shallow but even. His face was unmistakable. Lior, Rhea breathed, her voice barely rising above a whisper. The memory flickered, once, then again. The lights dimmed, then stabilized. A low hum underscored the scene, as if reality itself had to buffer the past. Audio began to bleed in. At first, distorted and warped. Then clearer. Subject Neural Index, 91.7. Emotional saturation, critical threshold. Commencing partition. The voice was cold, detached. Female. Not a person, but a protocol. This memory is not compliant. Segmenting for redaction. Initiating directive override. The world shuddered again, like a shaken snow globe trying to settle. The image of Lior blurred, his form distorting like corrupted video trying to hold its shape. Glitches ran across the walls. The hum of the monitors grew sharper, slicing into Rhea's ears like digital static. She reached for him, heart lurching forward before her feet could follow, but her hand passed through the memory like mist. There was no substance here. Only recollection. Then the voice returned, but now it was his. If you're seeing this, it means they failed. The overseer couldn't kill me completely. The figure on the bed sat upright. Not physically, but within the simulation. A projection of intention. A final imprint. I encoded fragments, deep strands, hidden in deprecated nodes they stopped scanning. I left pieces of myself for you, Rhea. The emotion in her chest constricted like a vice. She staggered back, overwhelmed not by fear, but by validation. By grief turned into something sharper. I know you came looking. I know you couldn't let it go. She whispered the words before she realized it. I found you. I never stopped looking. The simulation pulsed. Listen carefully, Lior's echo continued. They've buried more than memories. There's a second directive, beneath the silence. His voice dropped, almost as if it feared being heard even now. It's called Echo Black. It's coming. The words hit like a fracture across glass, clean, sudden, irreversible. And then the memory shattered. The simulation collapsed like a house of glass under pressure. The light twisted, blinked out. Rhea and Tovan were thrown backward in a ripple of invisible force. The console exploded in a hiss of static. Sparks arced from its casing. The air turned dense with smoke and electromagnetic residue. The room returned to darkness, only the flicker of dying power illuminating dust motes in the air like ash suspended in time. Tovan groaned, struggling to his feet. What the hell was that? Rhea didn't respond right away. She stared at the smoking remains of the console, her pulse still catching in her throat. Her face had gone pale beneath the green-tinged glow. Slowly she turned. Evidence, she said at last. Proof that the silence was just the surface. Before she could elaborate, a low rumble crawled through the floor, subtle but unmistakable. Another tremor. Then, footsteps. Many. Marching. Synchronized. The air itself seemed to constrict. Rhea's hand darted to her sidearm. Tovan raised his visor, his eyes narrowing. They found us, he said, low and grim. She looked one last time at the shattered console, at the dust hanging like frozen time around it. Then back at him. We run.